First of all, let me introduce myself to you. I'm Fiona Thompson, and I'm chair of the Royal Television Society's Yorkshire Centre. And I'm delighted to welcome you here for this session, but also I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the work that ScreenSkills have done in putting on this event today here in Leeds, which is now, according to the Chancellor, part of a devolved Yorkshire region. We have devolution. It's really good to have this event here. And so could we just please give a good big thank you to ScreenSkills. I mean, it's been fascinating so far hearing the other panels, and if you've been out to the other events, I hope they've been as good as the ones in here, because they've been excellent. But today's event we've set out to talk about practical steps that we can take to help people meet diversity standards in both film and television, and with case studies now from people who have done it and those who are there to help you achieve this. Now, just to give you a bit of background to me, I previously worked as a producer, and I produced programs for the BBC, Channel 4, and ITV in religious content. That was my choice, was to work in religious programs. And when I started in television in 1987 at Yorkshire Television, where I was also there, I'm also an out lesbian as well. I think I was the only one at Yorkshire Television, certainly nobody else ever spoke about it. But I worked in religious programming as an out lesbian, and there were no standards, there were no targets for us to reach with regards to diversity. But by the nature of the work that I was doing, it was, you couldn't make religious content, you couldn't make religious programming without acknowledging diversity around us. And so it was part of the DNA of what I did and what I brought to any program that I was involved in. And hopefully one day that will be the case everywhere, that it's part of who we are, that we're always looking that diversity is embedded in everything we do, and that producers unconsciously incorporate diversity in their programming. So this afternoon, you're going to hear from Kat Marshall, who is a line producer in film, who will outline how she incorporated diversity into her production and brought on board a gender consultant who worked with the crew to develop a better understanding specifically on gender equality and best practice. And we also have Julia Brown from the BFI with advice on how filmmakers can meet the BFI diversity standards. And from the TV industry, we're joined by two broadcasters, Miranda Wayland from the BBC and Babita Bahal from Channel 4, to provide hints and tips on how to meet their own guidelines. So, rather than me introduce you, it might be a good idea if you just introduce yourselves, just briefly who you are. So, Miranda, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so hi everyone. And firstly, can I just say it's phenomenal to be on a panel where there's diverse women. It's so often I go to these panel events and it's not reflective. So thank you, ScreenSkills, for making that happen, definitely. So I'm the head of creative diversity, worked at the BBC for a couple of years now. The remit for us is really focusing on what our audiences see, hear and read, making sure that we're truly reflective of the very stories and the essence of what UK audiences want to see and want to see represented. So my work is around that.
So I'm Kat Marshall. I'm the associate producer on Everybody's Talking About Jamie, which is a feature film adaptation of the musical of the same name. And we shot it last year. Yeah, we're currently in post. So, yeah.
I'm Julia Brown. I work at the BFI. I'm the Diversity Standards Manager and have been assessing the diversity standards since they were introduced in about 2016. So in terms of assessments for the diversity standard, which I'll go into a bit more detail later, I sort of assess them day to day, as well as look at kind of changes around the diversity standards. The other part of my job is also looking at tax relief, which is a little bit different, but super exciting.
We're going to hold you to that.
I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay,
so
all right. Talk to her later about that if you want to. Babita.
So I'm Babita Bahal. I feel like you're bog-off panellists today because I've already done one. So I'll try and keep it fresh and new and talk about different things. But I am the head of creative diversity at Channel 4. I've been there for 5 weeks. I was previously at the BBC for 6.5 years, so if I accidentally get my broadcasters mixed up, I'm really sorry.
We'll forgive you anything, because you did such a wonderful job on the panel at about 1 o'clock, wasn't it? 1:30 or something like that.
When I was expecting to have lunch, not be sitting on a panel, but hey.
Sorry, do you want a biscuit? That's the best I can offer you at the moment. But Babita, can we start with you? And please could you talk to us about Channel 4's diversity targets?
Right, I think firstly, thank you for inviting me. I should have said this at the last panel, but it was all a bit of a word. It's great, as Miranda said, to be on a panel like this. And actually, I have to nod to all of the amazing people that have done my job before at Channel 4, because I've inherited a really good foundation to build on, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. It's really exciting being at Channel 4. They have a heritage of trailblazing when it comes to diversity, but we want to do more. We've had our diversity targets in place since 2015, so that's when we launched our 360-degree charter. Since then, we have been continually monitoring year on year about how productions are meeting those targets. Last year we reported we're at 89%, which is really good, because actually you don't get a yes unless you have a yes on screen and off screen. So, you know, obviously you want to keep pushing that and get towards 100%, of course. And what a yes means on screen is that you've got content or subject matter or lead roles that represent or tell stories that are from underrepresented groups, so from ethnic diversity to LGBT, to disability, you know, so we're really looking at all strands of diversity. And then to meet the standard off screen, we're looking for representation of 15% in your crew of underrepresented groups, or the senior makeup of your team, so your heads of departments, your creative or your team, you've got representation at that level. In addition, you get bonus points if you do an internship or take a grad on as well. So to get to 89%, I think hats off to the industry for really taking this on board. Absolutely, there's more to do, but I think the starting point has to be recording it and seeing where people are at.
And how do you feel that production teams are doing this for the right reasons, or doing it because they know that they have to do it in order to meet your targets, or does it matter so long as practice changes?
I think there's different production companies who are at different starting points with this, right? And I think actually my experience is that when people do it and they start to see the value of that, whether that's access through having researchers who can go to places where they might not have access. I had a brilliant anecdote from somebody who was deaf in their development team, and what a brilliant experience that was for them in terms of learning how to communicate with each other and not talk over each other and give each other space. So you start to see the value of having those voices in the room. And I think, we're working with a production company at the moment called Luti Production, who have made Max for us. And they are a brilliant case study because they wanted to make sure that they had representation in all of their heads of departments. So they made sure when they were interviewing that they had BME and disabled representation on their shortlist. That was really hard for them to do, but they pushed and pushed and pushed and did that. And I think it mattered to them, so they're sort of at the other end of the scale. So they have then made Max for us, which has got, and I have to read this, sorry, I haven't committed this all to memory, it's fresh in. So they had representation at all of their HODs. They had black or mixed race writers, diversity in their director, their exec producer, and their on-screen lead. I mean, and they are so proud of that, and we're proud of them for pushing to do that. So I think, that they haven't done that because they were told to do it. They've done that because it mattered to them, and I think that's really important.
And how can Channel 4 help independent producers or groups to actually meet diversity targets? What practically can you do to help them?
So I think the thing that it's important for producers to know is that as broadcasters, we all have talent pools that we're aware of that have come through our various schemes. And actually, if there's a slide, I'm going to wave to him. He's not paying attention. There's a slide that I just want to talk to because this is really important. So I'm going to nod to Edie from Think Bigger, who has been running Channel 4's production trainee scheme for the last 15 years? About 12 years, sorry. And so Jordan Hogg was on the scheme in 2008. He is now a director on Ackley Bridge. So we are bringing in talent, nurturing them, training them. So we've got a pool of really excellent people that you can tap into. So I think one of the things we often get tired of hearing, and hope that I'm beginning to hear it less and less, is, oh, we don't know who the talent are, the people aren't out there, they haven't got the right skill set. You know, we have got pools of talent that you can tap into, and I think that is one of the biggest ways that we can help, because the off-screen situation is not as good as the on-screen situation, if we could even say the on-screen situation is good. On-screen is easier to do. And you might recognise some other faces in there, actually. Dwayne Eaton has just started on Commissioner Programme at the BBC in Ents. You know, this is really nurturing careers, and it's so important. And we have the talent, and you know, production companies, we work with a lot of production companies to make that happen, and it's really, really, really important.
I don't know if this is a question you can answer or it's one we can talk about as a panel, but getting talent in might be one thing, and some people struggle with it, others people don't. But it's then keeping it, and it's that kind of mentoring that goes on. Are the ways in which, from your experience, that mentoring has worked and has been really successful? It's not a case of just chucking people in at the deep end and saying, off you go, now swim, but do we actually support people through their careers? I mean, it sounds like this is something that actually does operate.
Absolutely. I think we do. We have a commissioner mentoring network at Channel 4, and actually Luty Productions had said that they had been on that mentoring program, and it's the relationships that they were able to develop and the access that they had from being on that mentoring scheme is absolutely invaluable to them doing this production. And I think a lot of people, me included, will say that actually along the way through our careers we have had people that have mentored us, coached us, championed us, and that is so important. And I think there are the formal schemes like the Women in Film and TV scheme, mentoring scheme, and you see talent coming through that because they feel propped up, and it's really important that we don't have a revolving door where we have loads of people coming in at entry level and we're just sort of spitting them out like, you know, like a sausage factory, that actually we're supporting them in the right way. And I think mentoring is so important for that.
Yeah, I think ScreenSkills would agree, because I think there's something in our pack about the mentoring scheme with ScreenSkills as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Babita. We'll come back to you again in a bit. Miranda, can I come to you as a representative of another of our broadcasters? Can you talk to us about the BBC's diversity commissioning guidelines and what advice the BBC offers producers to help them meet them?
I can definitely do that. And what's really nice is the fact that Babita's here, who helped champion most of it. So she can steer me in the right direction if I misrepresent in any way. So our diversity commissioning guidelines are really set out in terms of our public purpose charter, which is provides us with a remit to make sure that we're inclusive in terms of representation both on screen and on air, making sure that we accurately represent our diverse audiences. The guidelines really overlap in terms of the wider diversity inclusion strategy, which I can speak to much more clearly later on about how we really want to go beyond our own expectations, but also take our supply chain with us at the same time. The aims of the guidelines is really to provide some clear direction for our production companies about how they can go about meeting those targets and how we can do the best that we can in terms of the platforms that we have and the relationships that we have to be much more inclusive and representative. So it's really about looking at the different types of underrepresented groups that we see across our portfolio of output, whether that's ethnic minority groups or BAME, disability, gender, LGBTQ+, and now also socioeconomic diversity. We're looking to create greater opportunities for talent, not only just to enter, but sustain their career with us. And again, knowing that we work predominantly with indie supply chains up and down the country, and fortunate to have a global arm, we can leverage that relationship to make those opportunities available. We want to create a pipeline and be known as a broadcaster that really tells the types of stories that Channel 4 do so successfully, but we can also do in a different remit and a different way. And we've got the platforms and the channels to do that. So we want to do that across our entire portfolio. The guidelines really help to demonstrate how that could be achieved. And then it's really widening our breadth of storytelling. It's about looking at the best of who we are, looking at how we can tell those stories successfully, and giving other people opportunities to do that. So that's kind of what the guidelines is there to help support and navigate our supply chain. And Babita has been really instrumental. I have to give her absolute kudos for the work that she's done prior to me stepping into this role. So, as you said, we've done that on the foundation of the work that you've done, the connections that you've made, the positioning that you've given the BBC to be able to achieve that. So I absolutely applaud you for the work that you've done. And I'm really grateful that you left it in a good state for me to pick up. Oh, so thanks for that, babe. And in terms of what we offer, or actually what we can do to support, it's got to be a two-way relationship. We recognise that as a broadcaster we have some sort of weight in terms of what we're looking for and the relationships that we have with suppliers. So we've got a dedicated point of contact at the BBC. So at the moment we're recruiting for Babita's replacement, and trust me, that is not an easy thing to do, because she's an exceptional individual, so it's really hard to find a replacement of that calibre. We're also going to be advertising very shortly for a disability lead who will focus at both on and off-screen disability representation. That's a key area for us, as it is for all the broadcasters actually, the lack of underrepresentation in terms of who's working on our programmes and the stories that we're telling. Last year we hosted a number of events that brought our indie supply chain together, and again Edie from Think Bigger was really instrumental in helping us with the big TV link up, and it was an opportunity for us to bring diverse talent to the forefront of our suppliers. So again, to mitigate against this whole thing about not knowing where diverse talent is and are they dropping in and out of the industry. So that was really great for us, and there's been some huge success in terms of our connections. So 55 commissioning editors were in attendance, 13 independent companies. We curated over 300 structured conversations that have led to opportunities within our sector, and it's great. All the broadcasters came together, and it's really powerful when you see us combine as one to make a difference. So thank you to both Edie and Babita for making that happen. 50/50 project is something, again, we're really instrumentally proud of. So it's not just looking at how we support the production process, but actually who are the voices that are on our programmes. And in the newsroom, we launched a pilot programme that looked at having 50/50 representation from our contributors. I'm really proud to say that that's absolutely blown up and exceeded all expectations. So we now have over 500 production companies, over 6,000 producers that have contributed to this. It's now taking its toll in terms of global recognition and accolade, and it now means that actually what you're having is female representation in terms of contributors and their voices being heard. And we also have a number of funds, so we've got the Betrayal Fund, we've got the Diversity Fund, again, putting some money behind some of the efforts that people want to make for better inclusion.
Great, so lots of positive actions happening with these two broadcasters. Do you find you were knocking on an open door with people? You talked about all those commissioners, 50 commissioners, etc. Were they all there? Yeah, we've got this, we've got it. Or were they difficult
pretty
conversations?
much. No, actually, I remember a time where actually talking about the diversity agenda meant that I had to be locked off in a cupboard for fear that I was the diversity police, and everyone was just nodding, compliantly, saying, yeah, of course we'll do it. And then a year down the line, I was still having the frustrating conversation. So the business case for it, the rationale behind it, and the commercial benefit it has is one that we don't have to keep reselling, which is amazing, right? So it's brilliant that they understand it. It's brilliant that they can see how much it will grow in terms of audience share, how we can translate that into terms of getting our content out on multiple platforms. And that's the key, isn't it? We're all kind of looking at having the same end result. And so those conversations, to get them in the room, was not difficult at all.
That's good. But also you're both public service broadcasters,
Yeah.
so it's about recognising that public service needs to be redefined continually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've got a really unique positioning to be able to allow things the opportunity to grow, to give people those opportunities. both of us have returning programs and commissions and series that we can enable careers to grow and develop, and it's actually having those kind of critical conversations at the beginning to make that a reality.
Great. And you talked about the broader diversity strategy that the BBC has. Go on, give us a pen picture of that.
So the wider diversity strategy was designed in 2016 to take us up to the end of the year. And its remit at the time was really to kind of stretch us in our thinking and also to apply that methodology both on screen, off screen, and with our suppliers. So our targets sat at 50% for gender. Now we've moved it up to 12% for disability, 8% for LGBTQ+, and 15% for BAME representation. And year on year, we've seen growth. We're not complacent with it at all. And those stretching targets, when you're thinking about when we ran them in terms of the census, which was done 10 years ago, we know that our population is going to look completely different. So we want to be really progressive. We're having really stringent conversations about what our world is going to look like, what that audience representation is going to be. And we're having those bespoke conversations at the time of commissioning, at the time in terms of our workforce. We've done a huge amount of work to kind of really understand what's going on in terms of career progression, as you alluded to right at the beginning. We don't have an issue in our industry at attracting diverse talent. I think we're very fortunate that this industry is particularly sexy and attractive. Hard work doesn't seem to be an issue for people wanting to get in. And it's that retention, and we're working really hard and setting some targets and really questioning and challenging ourselves about why we're losing people. And I think personally it's about the culture. I think, you know, if we're able to attract people to our organisation because either they love the organisation that we work at or they love the creative industry, if the culture isn't right, irrespective of the paycheck, you're going to walk. And we fundamentally need to fix that, not just in a broadcaster's point of view, but also from a freelancer's perspective.
I think that's a really good point. If we have time towards the end, I think talking about culture might be an interesting panel discussion. But you talked then about a range of underrepresented groups, etc. Which ones would you say need a particular focus above any others? I know it's always difficult to
Yeah,
that kind of judgment,
because I'm going to upset someone in the room.
You are, yeah.
Well, I'm actually going to refer back to the CDN third Diamond Cup report, which was launched earlier on last week, this week? Yeah. Last week, I think it was. And while the sample size is small, it actually depicts exactly what's going on in terms of our own individual broadcaster reports. So they're identifying disability, both on and off screens, underrepresented. I think we'd all agree that that's evident. We're also talking about age in terms of female representation, 50 plus. What kind of stories are we telling and who's telling those stories, both on and off screen? Socioeconomic diversity, again, I don't think anyone would have any argument that that richness of storytelling from different parts of the country with different viewpoints aren't coming through as strongly as we'd like. From the LGBTQ+, whilst it wasn't identified significantly as a challenge, I think what's interesting alongside with the BME agenda is that we need to strip out the different groups that make up that totality. You will have a different experience as a black man and a black woman, as opposed to you will have the different experience being a gay man or a gay woman. We're comfortable, it feels, as an industry talking about transgender. I don't think we're that comfortable in telling stories and narratives from bisexual and different types of communities. So I think, you know, the report's very clear about where the gaps are and also the skills shortages. You know, we've got technical skills that aren't being representative in a number of ways. But again, it's really about how are we mapping that and how are we driving that forward.
And then it's all about the kind of intersectionality, because a
absolutely.
black lesbian will have a different experience.
Absolutely. So as a black woman with a disability, I have to go to various different networks to feel fulfilled. That makes no sense. So yeah, it's definitely about that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think we'll coming back to you again in a wee while, but I'm going to move on to Julia now and to hear about the support the BFI offers film producers to meet your BFI's diversity standards.
Yeah, so we launched Diversity Standards in 2016. They initially launched just for our kind of funded productions at the BFI. They cover kind of similar ground to your sort of standards. So on screen, Standard A. Standard B is about crew and sort of lead creative. Standard C is about industry access and opportunities and career progression. And Standard D is about audience development. So how do you actually get it to underserved audiences? Like I said, it had been going since 2016. Initially started off for all our funded productions, but then was moved out to our other lottery-funded activities, so everything from sort of development awards through to film festivals, film programs, and then it was also adopted by BAFTA and BIFA, which gave us a whole new kind of swathe of films coming into it, as well as Film 4, BBC Films, and also now Paramount for their UK-based productions. Recently, so in January, we had our kind of first cut of data from it, because we hadn't had it before. We hadn't had kind of a big sort of look at all the data that was coming in, and that's essentially in looking at where it's working was kind of what we were perceiving anecdotally, the actual kind of truth of the matter. And it kind of broadly matched up with what we thought. So in terms of what people were engaging with the most, it was standard A, sort of on-screen representation, and next to that was standard C, which is about that industry access and opportunities. Now, that's compulsory for everything but BAFTA and BIFA eligibility at the moment. So BFI funded stuff has to meet that. So there's a certain, if you tell people they have to have, internships, traineeships, career progression, they will actually go out and do it. In terms of on-screen representation, kind of gender was sort of the biggest area, which was, again, what we kind of assumed, 63%. Underrepresented ethnicities was kind of next, around 50%, but when we actually kind of dug deeper in that, 59% were kind of secondary characters and secondary narratives, whereas only 34% were lead characters and stories. So obviously there's an issue there in terms of it's lots of secondary characters, but then when you get to lead characters, not as much. Socioeconomic status and disability were relatively well represented on screen. Standard A had the biggest breadth of different underrepresented groups represented, but sort of looking at those figures again with gender being quite high, and then when you actually, in terms of lead characters, but everything else is a lot of secondary characters, secondary narratives, so there is a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of actually foregrounding sort of different underrepresented groups and characters. And sort of as expected in Standard B, which is about your sort of creative leads, you can kind of see whether if the people that are telling the story are not from the underrepresented groups that are kind of being sort of pushed to the back, then obviously that's why. So in Standard B, there was a lot of representation in terms of gender, in terms of sort of lead crew roles and secondary roles. But then that was 71% of kind of in Standard B, so for crew roles that people mate with. But then it dropped quite a lot to 40% for underrepresented ethnicities, 25% for LGBTQ+, but then everything else was less than 10%. So there's obviously quite a big gap there, and it kind of matched up anecdotally with what we expected in terms of people are having a lot of women. It's a positive story for women, and kind of matched up with sort of other trends that we were seeing in terms of the BFI's work. So we have targets for writers, directors and producers that we funded. It's 50% or more for women. But this was one of the areas where, having had all these stats, we knew that we needed to review basically were there any changes that we needed to make to the standards, and also what kind of targeted interventions would they need to be in areas where there's underrepresented groups that are being sort of more well represented than others, and what targeted things can we do to actually sort of help people in those areas, both in terms of recruitment and people that are struggling to get actually into those roles. For Standard C, again, gender was kind of the best represented at more than 54%. Underrepresented ethnicities, 27%. Most of the other underrepresented groups were under 20%. So socioeconomic representation, disability, sexual orientation and gender identity were all 7% and under. Now, as with Standard B, which is looking at crew roles, part of this is to do with, in terms of what information people are actually collecting about their crew. Obviously, with something like Diamond in TV, there's kind of more of an idea there, but in terms of film, it's just not standard practice for people to do that. That's one of the biggest questions that people come to us with, is in terms of how do I collect that information? That's just not something that we're doing. The BFI is doing a wider consultation about workforce monitoring, but sort of one of the things we want to give people in the meantime is, when we have our review, when we look at when we sort of start a new system for the diversity standards, there will be a way for people to actually collect it for the purposes of the diversity standards. So why that isn't going to be sort of widespread workforce monitoring, it is for people that kind of, it's a start, and for people who want to fill it in for these purposes. Standard D was probably the least, it was...
What is Standard D?
So Standard D is the audience development thing, so that's actually identifying an underserved audience, accessibility interventions, regional activity for the release of a film, as well as kind of partnerships that you actually have to let it reach those audiences. Part of that is to do with the fact that a lot of people that are coming to apply to us are doing so, the main part of their application is kind of at the beginning when they're kind of in production or even pre-production. So obviously they're not really thinking about, they don't have a distributor on board yet. But like I mentioned before, we are kind of having this, and I'll go into a bit more detail, we do have a new process that we're going to be using for diversity standards, which will allow people to engage at multiple stages and kind of sort of round out their entire kind of response to the diversity standard as they go along. So I think we'll actually see probably more engagement with that kind of in the future.
I think something about standards that's different to guidelines is that guidelines, people go, oh, they're guidelines,
Yeah.
whereas standards is a kind of requirement.
Yeah.
Do you find that people generally are engaging effectively with that, or do you get some defensiveness? It's not our problem, it's not our fault, we can't get we can't this, we can't that.
Yeah, I would say very much in the beginning, so back in sort of late 2015, early 2016 when this was starting, there was a lot more people that were like, they weren't familiar with them. They were just like, this is something that you're telling us we have to do. And then over time, I think people were like, oh, it's something you're telling us that we have to do, but actually they ended up finding it useful. Like being able to say at the beginning of a production, oh, I know that I need to sort of have some kind of career progression for someone. I know that I need to find someone that this could be a step up for, or I know that I need to engage with a work experience program, or I know that I need to have some trainees. I'm not sure where I need to look for them, but I know that I have to do it now, so I'm going to do it. So people actually I think, ended up finding it useful to have that in their mind from the beginning, whereas there are some people that are always going to think in that way. They're always going to, I know I'm going to do this, I want to do this, but there were the people that they didn't occur naturally them to look for that. I think having that there as kind of a tool to see what they needed to do was actually been helpful. And that's kind of what some people think it's kind of to penalise people, like you've got to meet this criteria or you're not getting funding and you're not eligible for a BAFTA. But our idea is very much that it should be a tool that are people using as they go along, saying, okay, I've got to meet this, but here's how I can actually use it to sort of enable me to think about different things that I could be doing, and here's where some gaps where I'm not meeting things I really want to, so where do I go to do that? And it also is from people actually realising that they're doing a lot better than they thought they were. Like a lot of people were like, I'm scared to fill it in, but then when they actually sort of had something to fill in, that actually I'm doing a lot better than I thought I was, and what else can I do to improve? So, yeah.
And what does your research or your understanding suggest are the biggest challenges for producers in meeting the standards?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things at the moment, in terms of, especially when people come to us for BAFTA and BIFA purposes, that's people, with the way the current system works, that's people coming to us only once the film has already been made and probably about to be released. So they're saying, oh, I did have some trainees, but I don't know anything about them because I didn't collect any information on them. So I think, monitoring is a big thing. And, like I said, the BFI is doing a bigger kind of workforce monitoring consultation, but so we are, as part of the review, we're launching a new diversity standards system. It's basically an online application form. At the moment, the way people respond is their application is free text-based that gives us a lot of information, but in terms of what we're able to do with that information and also how people fill it in, we just want to make that easier for them. So this new system will allow people to kind of, everyone will come at it to the same place. So at the moment, because people are applying to us for, say, funding reasons for BAFTA and BIFA, they're all coming at a slightly different stage and with slightly different ideas in mind. So we're going to have the system that will be same for everyone. People will be able to track what they're doing as they go along, and there will be this ability for them to actually do some monitoring of their crew, for people to do self-declaration monitoring as they go along. So they will actually have that information in hand throughout the entire process and not be scrabbling around saying, I think that we had these trainees, or I don't know what the makeup of my crew is, because then they don't know for something like filling in this form, but also they don't know, so they can make any changes if there's no way of them actually telling who was on their crew.
Okay, so my understanding then is that rather than this just being a reporting mechanism, you're creating a tool
Exactly.
that will enable production companies to actually record and monitor
Exactly.
the support, monitor everything as they're going along. So they can use it then, not just for data, but for, because each piece of data is a person, so it's actually making sure that there's a support in place. Is that the intention?
Yeah, and because it's going to be the same process for everyone now, so a two-stage system, people can, you know, at the beginning of a production, they can come in, say what they think the film is going to be, fill in some information about the crew they have then, what training programs they might want to use, if they want to step up some people into sort of higher roles. But then as they go along, they can add more people to it. And then when it comes to the end of the production, they can say, here's what actually happened. And also, we actually know something about our distribution strategy now. We have a distributor. Here's how we're going to target those underserved audiences. So it's something they can update as they go along to not only give us kind of a more round picture of the films that we're assessing against the standards, but also for them to say, here's all the things we did. Here's where things change, but we can do something else. So it's not just something that gets stamped, it's something that they're actively using themselves as a tool, but they can track as they go along.
And where they can do, they can identify gaps.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
if LGBTQ plus is being represented, then they can actually, without it looking like a quota system, they can actually go, because that's a danger, isn't it, as well, that it becomes a quota system or a tick box exercise. And I think what I've heard so far, and Kat, we will get to you in a moment, I promise, is that it's actually, this is about values, fundamentally, which then has to be monitored.
Yeah, and I was just thinking as well, kind of when you were talking about intersectionality before, with the initial report that we have, the way that the data was collected from all these different sources, it was kind of in quite big blocks. But with actually this new system as well, we'll be able to dig down a lot more into it, so we'll be able to actually have kind of a lot richer data to kind of go through in terms of, rather than it just being kind of headline blocks, which would be useful, again, not just for people to see in terms of outside, but also for us to look at as well in terms of how we're assessing things. So,
good. Yeah. So there's a lot of data going along. So again, going back to the broadcasters, but obviously, Julia, if you want to comment as well, Ofcom's recommendation to broadcasters in their 2019 report was that there needs to be more detailed monitoring to better understand employee profiles. And they also recommended making disability an area of focus to improve representation. What action are your organisations taking to ensure that happens?
So better representation for us at the moment is really looking at that subsection of how we're defining people and how we're categorising that. In partnership with the CDN, we've created some new protocols which enable us to work with some of our body members to help us ensure that we are being transparent and open in terms of how the data is being looked. We're currently in conversations with Ofcom at the moment because it's reporting season, sadly. So we're actually looking at what those key requirements are in terms of what they think good reporting and transparency would look like. But in defence of the BBC, what I would say is that we probably publish the most data out of all the broadcasters. We have a 94% return rate for diversity data from all of our staff. And we cut it in a number of ways that we can be as transparent as possible in terms of grades, in terms of job roles, leadership. We do as much as we possibly can because we understand that our remit needs to ensure that we are as transparent, if not more than anyone else.
Okay. Babita?
So my role is predominantly on screen and content, but I do know that Channel 4 workforce is at about 10%, and our target is for 12, so there's clearly work to do. You know, we're in luckily for us, a Paralympics year, so that is brilliant. So we are using that as a focus with our production companies to really look at what representation there is on all our productions, and then talking about the pool of talent that we have to try and increase that representation off screen. So that's like a big piece of work that we're embarking on at the moment.
Great, thank you. Julia, I don't know if there's anything you want to...
I mean, in terms of the sort of the information that came back from the sort of initial assessment of the diversity standards, I think disability is kind of one of the areas where definitely be one of the areas where we're going to review kind of targeted interventions, because in terms of on-screen, in terms of off-screen sort of lead creatives, in terms of like training opportunities, career advancement, like disability was pretty low across the board. I think that one of the stats was that there was basically nobody that had used any kind of mentoring program that was targeted at disability. So in terms of ways of improving that, BFI Network does have a new kind of mentoring scheme for deaf and disabled talent, but there's definitely other ways that we need to be kind of getting people to those pools of talent, and also thinking about how it's represented on screen, because I think in terms of the relatively high disability representation on screen, like I said, in terms of Standard A, there was kind of representation across the board, but thinking about how authentically that's being cast is a thing that we look at as well. So, and yeah, being able to collect more data on that as well.
Thank you. I mean, this might all sound quite dry because we're talking about data and data monitoring, but without that, we don't get a picture of what's really going on. But as I said before, each piece of data is an individual, is a person who is contributing to our media landscape. And that's why I think it's a good time now to bring you in, Kat, because Kat can talk about the kind of people side of it. I'm not saying that you can't, but you can give us an example of the people side of things through your work on Jamie, which is a musical I still haven't been able to see. It's touring at the moment, isn't it? I think it's coming to Leeds in April time, but you're working on the film for it. So would you had a big focus when you produced Jamie on gender identity. Did you say you're in the editing phase at the moment?
Yeah, so we're in the edit at the moment.
Yeah. So talk us through why you brought in, for example, a gender consultant, how they work with you. Talk us through your thinking around how you approach the production.
Yeah, so I guess Jamie, I guess everybody knows what it's about, but it's
you might as well
about
tell us.
a teenage boy who dreams of being a drag queen. And so, yeah, so it's kind of obviously Jamie's openly gay, and he dreams of being a drag queen. So I guess it became quite apparent, I guess, when we were working on the production that although we were a queer kind of story, we had a openly gay character, we were working kind of with lots of LGBTQ plus people, that potentially the crew maybe didn't have maybe an understanding of kind of gender neutral language and gender neutral pronouns, and we were working with a lot of people, generally supporting artists who were kind of trans or non-binary or gender fluid, and so I kind of noticed that, and I kind of went to the usual kind of sources for information, like see if there were resources. So like I think I looked at BFI, I think I looked at kind of PACT, ScreenSkills, and I couldn't find anything on kind of gender identity. And so then we kind of had a kind of conversation with the team about kind of how we could approach kind of getting a better understanding so that set was kind of a safe space for everybody, because the last thing we wanted to do was have kind of people being misgendered on set or kind of feeling uncomfortable. So I was recommended a person called Nim Ralph, who we brought on board, and I kind of explained the kind of situation. And Nim works across the board, like she works across lots of industries, and she consults on kind of gender, sexuality, but also like disability. Like they are just brilliant. And basically we worked together to kind of put together a tool pack of kind of, I guess, tools and resources that we could send out to crew, so that basically to kind of help them understand gender identity, but also to kind of, I guess, empower them to understand and to feel like that actually gender is quite confusing, and that it can be quite complex, and it's okay to get it wrong. And if you did misgender somebody, then, we just kind of, you apologize and you kind of move forward. And kind of, I think that's what, like, I found that, like, a lot of people were kind of scared of, was like saying the wrong thing or offending somebody. And so a lot of the kind of, we had kind of posters up around set, kind of outlining kind of gender neutral language that people could use. So like the AD team, if they were having to like move big groups of people, we had gender neutral kind of words, I guess, and explaining pronouns and things like that. So me and Nim worked together to kind of put together this kind of strategy for how we would deal with, make everybody feel safe on set, basically. And a big part of that was also talking to heads of department and making sure that their teams were reading the pack and, like, if anyone had any questions, and just, I guess, opening a dialogue up about it and not making it a scary thing, if that makes sense.
I think that's the important thing, isn't it, about the scary thing. Most people are not intending
Exactly.
to be offensive in the language that they use at all, but sometimes they're just not aware of what the right thing is. And a lot of language is contestable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know, Julia, that you said deaf and disabled, and that's because members of the deaf community, some of them will not consider themselves to be disabled. So deaf and disabled as a reference point is part of that language. Gender identity, it is incredibly complex, and we're all used to working with people who will address a group of people and go, guys, can we all come together? And just suddenly having to change all that language.
Yeah.
But how do you know that how would you judge success? I'm not talking about how you measure it, but how would you judge success?
So kind of success around
That
that.
it worked.
Yeah,
that it worked.
I got lots of feedback from crew, basically saying thank you for sending this pack round. I mean, the pack was like 27 pages long. It was like really went into lots of detail.
Comprehensive is the word you're
So,
looking
you know,
for.
when you're in the middle of a shoot and everyone's working really hard and, you know, it's quite a lot to ask them to read a 30-page document. But everybody, you know, most people did, and the feedback was thank you for doing this. Like, it's really, you know, it's really useful, and it's made us, you know, understand and feel a lot better about stuff. And also just like seeing people read, so we had A3 posters up just by the tea tables and stuff, and just seeing people having a sandwich and just kind of reading stuff and kind of nodding and going, oh yeah, like that was, I think it was nice. And there was a conversation that happened, you know, on set, and so I think it was a success, and I think just from the feedback, I think it was a success, but it's definitely something I think we could do more of. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that actually I struggled with was, so obviously gender neutral toilets. We wanted to have them, you know, everywhere we went, and because I think if we'd kind of, we did often have gender neutral toilets, but sometimes, I don't know, you'd turn up and there was a toilet that kind of had been delivered and it had, I don't know, male and female signs, and just like thinking like, okay, how do we deal with that? And I think it would have been great to have had guidelines that were available to kind of foresee some of those kind of like work out what best practice is and things.
And people who are working on it who would identify as gender fluid or transgender or whatever, did they feel that the culture was supportive and enabling and not about difference, as it were, but just removing all barriers for everybody? Yeah,
I hope so. I mean, I think so. I mean, generally, I think just, you know, I think if you turn up to work and somebody is just asking everybody what pronouns they would prefer, and it's not that they're just asking you, they're asking everybody. I think that just like that kind of, it's not about like being like, these people are different, so we have to like, it's about like, I don't know, I think it's much better that we talk about it and have a dialogue about it, and I think it's only maybe recently that it's become a lot more mainstream to be having these conversations potentially, so
I'm thinking 5 years ago, it probably wouldn't have happened this way, would it? Even just 5 years ago, you wouldn't have brought in a gender consultant to work in. And how did they work with did they work with individuals? Did they work with groups, or did they just advise about the documents?
So I think if we did it again, I would get them to come in at the very beginning and kind of work with, like maybe your AD team or like the runners or the people that are going to be, and maybe each head of department, so that basically they can then filter down to the rest of their team. In this case, NIM is incredibly busy, so most of their work was done over the phone with me and kind of via the internet, so putting all the resources together and things. So it was mainly NIM kind of communicating and talking through and coming up with a plan and strategy with me, and then I would like feed feed back to everybody else. So, but I'd have loved to have done some kind of, some kind of workshops with people, or like kind of, like really kind of done that from the beginning. And I think, Nim and I are already talking about like how we can maybe like create and make the resources and the packs that we used on Jamie kind of like accessible for everybody, because
That'd be amazing.
I think
Love that.
I think it would be cool.
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
That's what's so great about events like this, isn't it? We can share this information, and not hold it especially to ourselves. You know, it's something that we can use across the board. Are you able to talk more about Warp Film's approach generally to looking at representation, particularly underrepresentation?
I think Warp, we're a regional company. We're based in Sheffield. I think we've kind of got a long history of being kind of like trying to tell stories that maybe are from underrepresented groups. It's really important to all of us that we're telling stories and platforming voices that don't get heard. And I think when for example, when we set out to make Jamie, it's a casting. I'm going to talk about casting. I hope that's right. But basically, we from the get-go were very sure. Well, we made a decision that we wanted to cast regionally. We were shooting in Sheffield. It's set in Sheffield. The director's from Sheffield. I'm from Sheffield. The other producers in the production company are from Sheffield. So it was very like Sheffield-focused production. So it made sense that we would cast local, regional people. And the film is based in a school, so you've got the opportunity to cast 20 young people who are from the regions. So that's like what an amazing opportunity. And so it was really important to us that we kind of reflected a true, diverse Sheffield classroom, because and so we went out and did a big open casting search where we asked people to send in videos. And we were casting for over a year, so it was like a massive, we really committed to it, and we were supported by Film 4 and New Regency, our financiers, in doing that. I think Warp has a history of doing that kind of like, doing things a little bit differently maybe, and kind of like doing street casting or casting people that have maybe not acted before. And especially with our class, we were really careful about the language we used, so we wanted to make it sure that it wasn't just for people that had done musical theatre, it was like open to everybody. And of course you can't just put an advert out and be like, this is open to everyone, and then expect everyone to come. So on top of that, we also did like lots of outreach and went to community groups and youth groups and schools, and kind of used kind of local networks and stuff to kind of really reach out. And we were working with Shaheen Baig, who's like amazing and does that stuff all the time. So she's brilliant. So we really, I hope everyone feels that the class is a true representation of Sheffield, and we've ended up with a really diverse group of young people that are all from kind of Sheffield and the surrounding areas, and most of them had never acted in a film before. So I feel like that kind of sums up our ethos a little bit, to committing to trying to...
You've got these values and that commitment to underrepresentation, but it's also about that proactivity, that agency to go out. You're not sitting there waiting for people to come. You're actually saying, this is the type of people we want, and we're going to go out and we're going to go and find them. Yeah. Which takes time, it takes money, it takes resources. Yeah, definitely. But clearly it's something that Warp Films feels has benefits. Yeah, definitely. And I think Jamie is one of the biggest budget films we've done, so I think having that bigger budget allowed us to do all of that amazing year-long casting search and put all the effort and the time and the money into doing that. So I think it's important, like that. Yeah, we did. We had that budget behind us to be able to do that. So. That's excellent. It comes down to values. What we're talking here, we've got 4 panellists here talking from a values-led approach rather than just a tick-boxing approach, which is obviously to the benefit of the industry. But how do you get those values across to people who perhaps are just thinking about the bottom line, or think, actually, I don't need to think about this stuff because, hey, we've got this fixed, we're totally inclusive and welcoming, it's just that people don't want to come and work with us from these underrepresented groups. If they did, they'd find us very welcoming. How do you work? How do you get those values across to others that you're wanting to work with?
I think that's where the standards actually do help, because it sort of focuses the conversation. I think sometimes people find the diversity conversation a bit icky, a bit kind of like they don't really want to talk about it because of their own background. It might make them feel uncomfortable. You know, some people might not be comfortable talking about black people and whether that, or disabled people and what the right language is and things like that. So I think it's about leaning on the standards to start a healthy conversation, and making people feel that it's something that we need to talk about. You know, we're really fortunate at Channel 4 because our ed spec is electronic, so you can't sort of move on until you've ticked certain boxes. It is a tick box thing, but actually we're putting in place things now where actually even before that there's a conversation happening. So if by the time we're raising a project form, sorry, this is boring commissioning process stuff, but before you even get to completing your ed spec, you've had a really good conversation about what you're going to do on and off screen and how that's right for that production. So it's about having a really meaningful conversation, I think, with producers really early on about what your expectations are, what audience you're trying to reach, and for, you know, Channel 4 particularly, and actually at the BBC, how that fits with what our public service remit is as well, in terms of finding exciting voices and different voices. And, you know, I said on the panel earlier that we've made a commitment over and above the Ofcom requirement to 50% of our original productions being from outside of London by 2023. So we've got to start engaging with voices and companies that are going to help us deliver that, really. One of the other big focuses of work that I'm looking at the moment at Channel 4 is how we've all talked about the good news stories. There are things that we still need to focus our attention on. Diversity within our supply chain is a massive thing that we need to look at. We want to have more nations and regions voices. We want to have more companies that are led by creatives from different backgrounds. And you might have seen our teens brief that went out recently where we've said, actually, we want 50% of that. 50% of that has to come from people in the nations and regions and with from companies that are led by creatives and the ethnic minority. So you're starting to invite those people into the conversation and making it sort of, I don't want to say ring fence, but you're saying 50% of that's got to be from there, those hours. So, you know, you're sort of inviting people with different values in.
Yeah.
I think you have to, I think personally for me, and then from the organisation I work in, you have to lead by example. I mean, I'm a parent, so I can tell my kids one thing and do something completely different. I can't then get upset if they do what I do when I'm asking them to do something different. So we have a duty of responsibility. If we're saying we want X, we need to demonstrate and evidence that everything you're saying about not being able to find talent, look, we found them, we work with them, my expectation is you do the same. And I think we do that across the broadcasters well. I think there's room for us to do better. I think we need to be really clear about what our expectations are and not to have this grey area conversation where it suddenly feels a little bit negotiable. And that's, again, something I know that both Channel 4, BBC and ITV respectively are now looking to make that much more crystal clear. If you said you're going to deliver X, then we're expecting X to be delivered, not that you agree it at the point of ed spec and sign off at commission, then you've got the money in the bank and, oh, I'm really sorry, I tried to get them, they weren't. So it's now got to be, we've had the honeymoon period of being softly, can we just get down to the art of doing the job that we've asked you to do? Because it's really not that. They've managed to find diverse people on the panel. Come on now. We need to do what we're asking people to do and hold everybody, us and them, accountable.
Yeah. But I think there's a part of what I've been listening to all through this afternoon, the three panels, is that the one word that I haven't heard used yet is the word privilege. And we've had a little bit of conversation here about the difficult conversations, the challenging conversations. And we're currently in, we see lots of examples at the moment, for example, on television of black women, usually black women, being told that they cannot define something as being racist by somebody who is white, either white male or white woman. You're going to get me started. You don't want to come to me first. You know, and without any understanding of privilege. And for me, it's these difficult conversations that we need to have about understanding privilege. Because if you talk to people who have privilege, you know, I have privilege, oops, I have a microphone as well, I have privilege, you know, it's about getting them to understand that they do have privilege, because they don't see it. You don't see that privilege unless you've had it spelled out to you. And I remember talking to somebody from the Creative Diversity Network when the RTS here in Yorkshire was going to put on something, and she said, imagine if you, as a white woman, was walking into a production team that was all black. How would you feel? And I thought, yeah, okay, I can get that sort of, except that I would still be walking in there with privilege. And that does make things slightly different. It's not the same shared experience. So I think, how do we have these difficult conversations that are usually around privilege or around fear of getting things wrong, or around actually, you know what, this is, whoa, just keep us away from this, it's too dangerous. I mean, you've obviously managed to do it effectively to a certain degree at war, but how do we get to the point where we can have those difficult conversations, to feel safe to have those conversations?
You're asking us to Sid, don't get me started, and then I jump right in. I'm sorry, people. So I think there's two things that you've asked here. I think it really is about the privilege thing, and then it's about the conversations that we know we have to have that we really don't want to have. Race being one of them. I think the privilege thing, we all have a level of privilege, whether it's your background, your education, whether you see people advancing or not. I'm a black woman who has a hidden disability. I don't ever have to worry about walking into a venue and wondering whether or not it's accessible, right? I could use my privilege, I should use my privilege much more to challenge organisations and institutions, restaurants, whatever it happens to be, to make sure those buildings are accessible. I should be going up to the owners and going, actually, do you have an accessible route into this restaurant? And even if it's not for me, it should then make them think. They'll have to answer my question. I could use my power for good. We can all use our power for good. Because you're not impacted in the moment, and because you're not impacted in your day-to-day, it's often hard to remember that you have that superpower and you can use that to influence and change. The issue about race, oh Lord. So my problem here is that we, as a woman, I can walk into any organisation and say that I've experienced some sort of sexism. Nobody will ask me to evidence it, to give names, to date it, to describe it, to justify it. A member of staff could come up to me and say, actually, they've had homophobic experiences, or they've experienced ageism, or any of the isms that we know. And at no point do we ask them to document it. We accept that we live in a society where these things happen. You talk about race, and what people hear is, I'm calling you a racist. And so they want to shut down your conversation, they want you to justify your lived experience, they don't want to embark in the conversation. And actually, we're actually talking about race and racism in two different contexts, because the premise is, you're thinking that my life is good because I can vote, I can go to work, you know, we've got rights. Whereas I'm looking at it, yeah, you say all those things, but I don't see myself represented at the top. Constantly getting reports that I'm not getting paid equally. So I'm looking at it at a different lens. So if we can't have the basic conversation to understand, when we're talking about race, what perspective are you looking at it versus what I'm looking at it, and then you don't challenge me about my lived experience. If I said I'm experiencing racism, I don't run around saying that. It's an uncomfortable thing to say. You know that if you mention it, potentially your career has come to an end, because somebody's not going to want to take that on their slate to have to deal with. So we need to get past this whole thing about wanting people to justify and vilify their experience and accept that people have these things in the workplace, as ugly as it is, and then get to the core thing, which is, how can I support you to make sure that doesn't happen to you going forward and anyone else? Because none of us want to work in an institution that has that as the backbone of it. And we need to stop shutting people down when we want to talk about it. So.
Absolutely. No, yeah, thank you for that. But I think it's shutting down means we don't have the conversation.
Absolutely.
And we need to have the conversations about all these things to actually get through the fear and get through the learning curve that we all need to get through. And I mean, I've been involved in LGBTQ politics for all my adult life. And I, you know, we get told, well, you can get married now. You're protected in law, you're all right.
As if it eradicates
it's
everything else, right?
You still have to come out in every new situation.
Absolutely,
You still have to talk about who you are. And it's about actually having those conversations that enable us to move things forward so that we do remove all the barriers to entry, all the barriers to engaging with, so that people understand us as individuals, as people. We might have different characteristics, protected in law or whatever, but that we can move on and have those conversations and not close down those discussions 100%. Because we don't learn through that way. We just put those barriers up.
And I think the work that as an industry we're doing around socioeconomic diversity is a really good way to shine a light on what privilege looks like. You know, if we are saying that to do a week's work experience for Channel 4 in London, we need to cover your lunch, we need to cover your wages, we need to cover somewhere for you to live, then people are starting to understand, actually, I didn't have to do that when not me personally, but people who could afford to not do that and do unpaid internships and work experience, etc. It sort of is helping the penny drop and crystallising, because quite rightly you say, you know, people who are privileged, it's not visible to them. And I was on a panel for International Women's Day, and we were talking about imposter syndrome, this whole kind of thing about, you know, not feeling that you're good enough or not feeling your worth. And I'm saying, look, we are, as you quite rightly say, we all are privileged in a certain way. We can all help people in the industry because we all have certain contacts or access or funds or things that can help people. And I think, you know, it's important I think we recognise that we are in a privileged position with our particular jobs, etc., because we've been on a journey to acquire it. If you have it, it's harder to see. So I think for all of us who are in some sort of a position where we can help other people, we absolutely need to leverage that. So, you know, if that is introducing to people to, you know, 3 other people that might help them in their career or they should know, or mentoring someone, I think, you know, it's really important that we recognise that we can all sort of help each other rise up.
Absolutely, and I think for me it's always been about a culture of allies, that not being a bystander.
Absolutely.
You call things out, or hopefully somebody else will call things out for you, so it's not always you taking on the role of senior token insert characteristic, as it were, that there are other people standing around. And I think that sounds like the work that is actually going on is actually also about raising things so that we have allies.
I was just saying, this just reminded me of quite a practical, boring way of having those conversations that people don't feel comfortable about, of the diversity standards being used as a way of doing that. So since we've had them for development type projects, both for the Young Audience Content Fund and for development film projects, like sometimes there's been you know, execs have come to us saying, you know, I'm not sure about it in terms of who's telling this story, like have they thought about whether they're the right person to tell this story? And we've kind of looked at what their writer's room is, or like what the makeup of the crew is, and actually just and they said, you know, what do you think about it? And us looking at it and saying, yeah, actually it does seem a bit weird. Have they thought about why they're saying that this character is from this particular underrepresented group when actually there's nobody from that underrepresented group in who's making it? And so actually, for us to actually be a way to ease into that conversation just from a very boring, practical way has actually allowed people to actually start that conversation. And because we're the diversity standards people kind of calling it out, they didn't feel as uncomfortable then explaining why. And some of them are actually rethought about it after then saying, actually, we're going to go away and develop this more and think about, like, why did we choose that underrepresented group, and were we thinking about it authentically, or were we just saying, well, we thought we'd want to have this type of character without actually thinking whether they were the right people to tell it. So that's literally being that person to actually say, have you actually thought about this?
That's brilliant. That's really, really good. I think it's now time to hand over to our audience. We've got 20 minutes. The clock is over. There you go. Do you want to just say who you are and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Kath Shackleton from Fettle Animation.
I mean, I know who you are. But,
First of all, congratulations. There's much more interesting stuff on the telly now because of you guys. So nice one. It does seem a bit opposite, though, to the way the country is going now. We're getting Brexit done and all of that. I'm wondering about flack and backlash, and in particular, the rather marvellous noughts and crosses Miranda, have you had a really hard time because of that one, and what's going on?
I don't think we had a hard time with noughts and crosses, did we particularly?
I sort of checked out of that one. What are you particularly talking about?
Well, there's been vicious remarks on...
On social media? Go away.
Oh,
Not on
yes,
social
sorry,
media.
yes, now I understand. I thought you meant getting it to commission, sorry. Look, when you put a programme on like that, irrespective of the broadcaster, what you're doing is you're asking society to look at something different. And you are always going to get that kind of stuff. I'm not here to entertain ignorance and people's racist behaviours and thoughts. You need to park that somewhere else. What it does do is it shines a light still about where we are in society and how things are viewed and why we have those particular blockers. And I think we all in our individual spaces have an opportunity to challenge that in our responses. But actually, as a broadcaster, we can't be seen to be bowing down to that negative behaviour, which is why Noughts and Crosses has to continue, and many more programmes like it have to continue, because what's happening is this is being seen as an anomaly, as a one-off, and it now needs to be seen as the start of an ongoing raft of content that speaks to a huge demographic that not all of us are going to like. But that level of ignorance, I try not to entertain it. I try to make sure that that isn't a deterrent for us doing what we want to do and what we need to do in terms of our storytelling.
I think there's my opinion is that we are tending now, we tend to see things in a binary. Something is good or bad, and we've lost the kind of fluffiness around, the kind of fuzz around things, and the social media gives people an opportunity to bring out their opinion, whatever. And it's always interesting to look at the very negative comments, see what they put under their byline. It's usually things like, be kind to others, or things like that. And then they go, like that. And I mean, how many of you watch Noughts and Crosses? Yeah? What did you think?
Binge it.
Great, yeah. I thought it was. I think they've done Mallory Blackman proud. I think it's a really good representation of the books, etc., and brought more up to out of young adult. But it is making us ask questions. It is making us think. And isn't that what television is about?
Yeah,
It doesn't tell us what to think.
Yeah.
It tells us what to think about.
Yeah.
And I think that's its strength. But now everybody's got an opinion, and everybody's an expert. Don't get me started. Okay, another question. Hello, yes, and I'll come to you.
Hi. I just want to say, I think the broadcasters are doing quite a lot in terms of diversity. I think when you go on the websites, you can see encouragement and things like that. But I just wondered, what are production companies doing, especially for like freelancers? Because obviously, if you work for a broadcaster, it's usually full-time work that you're looking at. What are they doing, or how can the broadcasters help production companies? Because for myself, when I'm working on sets, as you said earlier, I'm always representing, and I think people as well can treat you differently. Well, they do treat you differently, and it's not that it's a problem, because I've worked in so many industries prior to that, and I've had similar things. But I think probably having worked in the TV and film industry, and especially working on a film that represented black people, it literally was like I was the only black person there, and I felt quite disgusted, to be honest with you, especially when you're telling a story that reflects my community. I think I'll hand this back to you. But yeah, that's, I don't know if
So look, we have some indies who are phenomenal about trying to create change. They're connected, they understand it, they get it. Those aren't really the ones we're talking about. We're talking about the ones that are a little bit harder to get across the line. We know our industry is based on nepotism, so we're not going to pretend that's not a massive influencer. But I think the thing that needs to happen, and maybe that's where we need to, particularly my role, and maybe the role of the BBC being one of the biggest employers in this space, is we have to short fuse that whole thing about what we consider excellence to look like, the package it comes in, and this lastminute.com commission, which drives a particular response rate. So in the same way that Kat took time to think about, well, what's my end goal? What do I want to achieve? I know the narrative of what I'm selling and what I'm making, but actually I need to be much more mindful about the people that are engaged in that, to the point that she made sure that there was regional representation. And irrespective, I'd like to think, having not spent that much time with you, but just hearing you talk, I would like to think even if you didn't have that latitude to spend in casting for us a year, your starting point would have been, okay, if we've only got a short window, let's do the best that we can with the time that we've got. Where we can probably have the greater influence is, so the relationship between commissioner and indie starts at a certain place, can continue to be ongoing, but at some point we've hired people to do a job and we're leaving them to do it. I think a little bit, Babita's work that she's done with the indies and counterparts across the organisation, and the other broadcasters try to do that, try to have that ongoing relationship, making sure that people are accountable. I think we just have to challenge that thought process. We need to speak to our producers, we need to speak to casting agents and casting directors and go, look, we can't keep having you default to same old. People can't keep turning up on our returning programmes and returning shows and being almost guaranteed a job series after series after series. We've got to, even if they changed one person on the production, the ripple effect it has is phenomenal. Because what happens is you get an opportunity to work on it and you become the beacon for all black women, and then they go, oh, you're not a risk. Okay, well, let someone else in. You just end up just doing you, but actually you change the narrative of how they see and how we work with difference and diversity and representation. And I think it's that work.
Can we get the microphone back to you? Sorry.
Yeah, I totally hear you, and thank you for that. The other thing I just wanted to add is that another thing, it's really good to do these programs that include other communities. But one thing I noticed is that, for example, if I was to, let's not make it specific to me, but if a black person was to apply for a role, for example, they would have to do an application form, and they've got to explain in 500 words why they want this job, what they can bring to the table, all this sort of stuff. However, when someone from another community gets an opportunity, it's just come in, or let me invite. I was on a production and literally I was the only person that didn't bring in someone, and but everyone, it's quite ancestral, so people bring in their friends, their families, so that's a challenge in itself as well. But I just find that the requirements for someone from the BAME community is a lot higher. For example, you've got to be selling yourself on another level of why, and also we're creative individuals, so how it may not be easy for us to put together 500 words of why we deserve the role, and I just think that there should be other things in place to support that.
Can I just pick up a couple of things? You're quite right, and there's some, the BBC, and I'm going to call out Dina at the back, sorry, but really understood that thing about in the creative industry you have other, probably better ways than a 2-page CV and an application form for expressing who you are and showing off your talent. So what was it called when you ran it? Where It Begins? No, that was... Yes. So when they were recruiting for that, you shot a bit of film, didn't you? You talked, or you sent in a piece of creative, and I think that's really important at looking at ways in which we are judging people. And I don't think for our industry it's always right to do that sort of application form. And then the other thing I just want to say about the way the industry works. When I walked into Channel 4, I instantly felt like I belonged there. And the reason was because there were people who I've been connected to over the last few years who were there as well. So when you see people that look like you and are familiar to you, you arrive really differently. And Harj, that was on the panel before us, made that point about growing your own network. So you ultimately need to have these alternative networks that you rise up together and you take people with you. So when something comes up, he was saying, he calls it job karma. So if a job comes up, he puts and he can't do it, he puts other people forward, and he says that will come back to him. So I think we need to work the system as people who are in it and trying to challenge the way it works, which because it's an incredibly networked industry. And when I was saying earlier about leveraging our particular privileges that we have, if someone comes to me, I will try and introduce them to 3 other people at least that can help them. And so we need to grow networks that sort of then will merge together and make change happen. But it's hard. It's lonely, isn't it, being the only person representing in any room. Actually, it's difficult.
Kat?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think as well, producers should be making sure that they're having those conversations with their heads of departments from day one, being like, you know, like, it's saying, like, let's make sure that our teams are made up of lots of different types of people and not just who you worked with on your last 4 jobs. And I think producers should be really kind of clear on that in saying, like, we don't just want you to bring your mate and, you know, all these people. And I think we need to get better at that, basically.
So it's actually about making active, thought-through decisions. This character is like this because, or we want this person behind the camera because. It's active thinking, active decision-making, rather than just pulling in who you used to.
Yeah, and just like opening up networks.
Yeah, opening up networks.
And opening up.
Yeah, but hopefully today you've picked up some ideas from the stuff that other people are doing that ScreenSkills offers that can hopefully help you get forward.
Can I just start on that? I'm from ScreenSkills, and picking up on what Babita said about growing our networks. In your bags, you've got Be a Mentor.
Or be a mentee. And please, please sign up to be a mentor. You can be a mentee as well if you want, but sign up to be a mentor, because that's exactly what we're doing, is we're trying to share those networks that other people have got so that we can all do things together. So please do that.
Thank you. So you had a question. So you still got it? Yes. The microphone's coming your way.
Hi, my name's Jude. I'm a mental health trainer. But before I get to my point, just to say to you that there's a fantastic London-based diversity network group called Soho Media Club. So if you're in London, they're fantastic and they promote diversity, so they'd be worth joining.
The person to contact is Jessica Lapsuwala.
Yeah, Jessica. Yeah, she's fantastic. I'm a mental health trainer, and thank you so much for your hard work for trying to make it a more diverse and inclusive industry to work in. I was really interested to hear your stats about disability in particular. Mental illness is the 2nd leading cause of disability in the UK and the biggest worldwide. I was curious as to whether the stats that you refer to ever refer to mental illness, or is it solely physical disability?
We also alludes to your earlier question about transparency. At the moment, our disability data isn't defined or cut in that way. Internally, we're having a big conversation about making that a reality. And there has been conversations not only with Ofcom but other regulators that felt that that is the right direction of travel. So we are due to launch a new diversity strategy next year. This one expires this year, so that's on the top of the agenda about doing that. And yes, I sat in your session previously, and thank you for your contribution actually, because you are making a significant difference. Mental health, I think, even in its entirety, we're still uncomfortable about talking about it because we think of the impact it will have on our career. Speaking up about being different often puts the fear that whoever the recipient is isn't going to understand, and then it's going to just see the hurdles they've got to overcome. We do a number of things around mental well-being. We do workshops, seminars, conferences. We've got a mental health well-being first aiders. We do that. I don't think we're ploughing enough energy in the freelance market. That's quite a fluid, you're in, you're out, job well done, see you on the next set if you're lucky. I think we do have to do a lot of investment around there. And I think, you know, if I think about my journey, it took me forever, ironically, bearing in mind what I do for a living, to actually feel comfortable to say that I have a disability. I'm still not even sure I'm comfortable to say what type of disability that is and whether or not anyone actually needs to know. But the fact that I struggled with that particular journey means that it's so important that we talk about it openly, because I might have got to that state of being comfortable if it was a common conversation happening around me. And now in a position where I have a title where people ask me to come all the time to do these panels, I feel a duty of responsibility. If I wasn't empowered for myself, I need to use my privilege to let other people know that talking about disability, mental well-being, saying no to doing ridiculous hours, you know, not feeling as a woman that I have to be here crack of dawn, last minute at night to be recognised, that my only communication with my kids is through social media. I'm in a position, I'm not too worried that I'm going to get sacked from it. So now I need to use that position to give voice for other people. So I applaud you for doing it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think the fact that the PowerPoint has gone
done.
is an indicator that the lights are
Does
about
someone
to
need
go
to
out.
put 50p in the meter?
It's like the old days of television when the lights in the studio would go down and that was it. Although it says here we've got 3 minutes and 22 seconds
to go.
But I think it probably is time for me to wind up. So what a fabulous panel! What an absolutely fabulous panel we're here. Please thank Miranda, Kat, Julia, and Babita. And I think we can honestly say that just on the basis of these 4 women here in the room today, that in terms of diversity, our industry is in safe hands with the work that they and their colleagues are doing to actually help make things a lot better, a lot more inclusive, so that we can remove all the barriers that are affecting individuals and groups. So I think it's just brilliant. So a big thank you to you as well. And I've been asked by ScreenSkills to say, please can you complete the feedback forms and give them to the room rep?
That's right, and I just wanted to say, add to your thanks. We're so grateful at ScreenSkills for you giving your time. Everyone's so stressed and busy at the moment, but you're a really inspirational panel. I'm really proud to have worked with some of you and to get to know the others of you. And thank you so much for coming. Please do contribute. Please be part of the dialogue. Please be a mentor. And safe journeys home. And thank you very, very much to Felicia over there, who's put the most amazing amount of work into organising this.